We have some questions. John?
It's not really a question, if you don't mind. I'd like to make a comment, and which to me is really fundamental. My experience of this kind of situation is based on my own experiences many years ago in primary school, but also on the experiences of going to the Middle East and sending my 4-year-old son to an open school, completely open school, where there were children of all faiths, an amazing number of faiths, and none, and reflecting on his experiences. And the point I want to make is, and I think it's well established now, children are absolutely blind to all the sorts of differences that we're talking about. They're absolutely blind to race, to creed, to all these divisive factors until they're taught to be aware of them. And that is as applicable to schools for all kinds as it is to members of society. Young children are taught to, you mentioned Northern Ireland, young children are taught by their parents about the Catholic Protestant life. Small children are taught about racial differences by their parents long before they go to school. And so the question of actual, whether faith schools, if you like, are the villains of the piece, or potentially the people that are going to sort this out, is really rather not to the point. So I would like for there to be an open statement that faith schools is a contradiction in terms, in a way, when we're talking about bringing up our children to be happy, satisfied and fulfilled and constructive members of society, then having a school which is any kind of faith tradition is not contributing to that.
Sorry, my name is Mike Salson.
Hi, Mike.
I'm the founder of a local charity in Reading called the East-West Detox, and I work in the field of addiction, drug and alcohol addiction, but also prevention. And one of the things that I do, and have been doing over the past 4 or 5 years, I go to schools and teach children meditation. And what it is that I've had so many positive outcomes, and what I've found is, for example, I've been doing it for 3 or 4 years in a local school in Whitby called Christ the King, which is a faith school, for example. Now, a very small percentage of those children there are Catholic. Yes. I mean, there are Hindus, Muslims, also. I also go into non-faith school, the John Gatsky Academy, and work with very troubled boys who are on the verge of being excluded. Now, I found some really common ground here, and what I've found is that it's focusing on the spiritual experience more than the words, the thoughts, and actually experiencing Spirit and God through something and keeping it simple. And the results that I've had have been absolutely amazing. You know, the changes in children's behavior, the relationship with the teachers, the parents, and then what I've also done is to start groups with the parents. And so I involve the parents and the children and the teachers together after school. And it really works, you know, because we're not focusing on any particular religion. You know, I'm a Christian, practicing Christian. One of this treatment program that I provide, I take people out to a Buddhist monastery in the Far East, and I take Muslims from Reading, I've taken Jewish people, all sorts of faiths, you know, and it doesn't matter, because one of the key things is the relapse prevention, which is the meditation again. And again, going back to what you were saying, all these desires have been created by, I think it was Freud's uncle, these desires through the media are attachments. And through meditation, I've been able to actually deal with those problems of actually teaching children to start to live in the present moment, which is the only time one can connect spiritually, and also to deal with all these images and thoughts and desires that are thrust upon them through the world. And I just wanted to share that with you because
that's really interesting. Brilliant. Gosh, we've got good speakers in the room. I'm going to be really, can we be really disciplined? Let's have questions now. Okay, questions. Okay, it's a question.
Yes, there's a bit of an introduction that leads on to a question. It's because, what it is Dan Hobson, teacher of religious studies in Maidenhead, humanist, working on humanist education things, teacher trade unionist, supported the Court Coalition, so an ex-Catholic schoolboy, so this is kind of my life. Really, a few things I wanted to look at, and it's a good job that you had the moments of reflection before, because I've been scribbling down notes. The curriculum review, there's an awful lot of issues with the curriculum review about where that's going, about what the National Association of Teachers of Religious Education are doing with that, and the EBAC and everything that. And for those of us in the know, it does seem like a bit of a fudge for where it's going. But I think the issue that I wanted to raise and the question really is about the nature, because you mentioned about the media and the influences that the media has on our pupils and our children. And I think the nature of debate and the way that the debate is presented between religions and discussion, this is a wonderful group, and you know, doing wonderful doing wonderful work. But I'm not so sure that at times that debate between religious groups is presented in such a way by the mainstream media. If we look at, I mean, I know that, you know, this discussion group, the big questions on Sunday morning, is perhaps not the greatest way of presenting a debate, really, or Sunday morning live, or such question, such way. It's going for sensationalism, really. And I just wondered if both speakers sort of really had a view on how the media is representing faith to our pupils has an impact on their outlook.
Okay. Who's going first then? John.
Media. Yeah, I mean, my experience of it, like you, is to hear in the odd Sunday morning or Sunday discussion where the views of one faith group, I think, tend to be presented, and then another one at another time. So you don't have the discussion of, well, should you know, along the lines of is a faith group a good thing or not? It's the differences between the one particular one. I don't know whether that's your point, or whether it is that you would feel that the media is being hostile or friendly towards faith groups. My own experience is neither, although you could say that the amount of coverage, which is pretty small, would indicate would give some idea.
Thank you. Would you like to say something? The media is something.
Well, I suppose it's pretty negative in the two senses. One is that very often the media goes in for stereotypes.
When they want to show a Jew, to take my lot, they'll show someone with a big black hat and black beard and the side locks, because that's visually Jewish, and everyone can identify. And in fact, I was doing a programme with BBC yesterday on Sunday, and they said, haven't you got a uniform to show people? And there was a picture with a dog collar, and you know, so and therefore television, which needs to create images quickly, falls into that trap. The other thing is that if you think about it, a lot of television programmes, serials about religion, are actually comedies. You think of The Rev, before that Vicar of Dibley, Father Ted, go back a little bit further and you get all Gastigators and Derek Newman. So that's right. So that says something as well, that they feel they can't sustain serious programmes about religious debate, and it tends to get shunted onto Radio 4 and some really good serious programmes like Beyond Belief, which is why it's all more important that children get a sort of good religious horizons from school. And yes, somebody said they can learn prejudices from home. All the more reason that they shouldn't be then going to a ghettoised school where they just meet just Jews, just Catholics, just Muslims, but actually meet a full range of people and actually can interact with them. And it's also why I think it's actually wrong to restrict religious values, which I share with you, just to religious schools. I think, you know, spiritual and ethical values should permeate community schools just as much. And I would hope that community schools, which are still 2/3 of this schooling, will have things such as your values of integrity, truth, equality. They must be in the community schools as well. And I would want community schools to teach about all faiths from a point of view of knowledge. This is what Hindus do, this is what Muslims believe, this is what Jews, how they do their home cycle, this is what Sikhs do in their sort of their personal life, so that children actually know. So it should be education in the best sense. The indoctrination, if you like, you must do this, you must do that, that comes from the home or the faith groups. But the school should provide the information and the education.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of media, I know that we had an experience at Christmas when I was asked to get several people on Radio Berkshire to talk about what they were doing at Christmas. And it was a little bit like, I think, the trip to the zoo. Here is the Jewish exhibit, here is the Muslim exhibit, rather than a real feeling of, we do find that there are some journalists we know that are very much more understanding, and some that are actually plainly terrified of faith. Paul, you've been very patient over questions, so thank you.
Can I start with the question and then actually give a little bit of comment, which is the background to the question? The question is, can we not have what you want, John, but have it in our community schools? And the background is, my first school was in Northern Ireland. When I was 10 or 11, I noticed that somebody was wearing a cross. Somebody's shirt was open. I noticed they were wearing a cross. I was absolutely horrified. Probably he was a Protestant, because everybody at the school was a Protestant, but he was a slightly Catholic-y sort of Protestant, oh dear, right? So, you know, it was a good school. It wasn't a faith school, but it was a mono-faith school, yeah? And that was a very bad thing. And I'm very pleased that I moved away from that. I moved away from it to what we would now call a community school, a grammar school in Brighton, where there were lots of Jews, and that was my first experience of Jews, and lots of, you know, people of various faiths. And it was an excellent school, and the sort of stuff that John was talking about, I got. I mean, there were excellent teachers, and those people were good role models for me. And why, you know, isn't what we're talking about actually holding up a higher standard for our community schools to reach? And, you know, maybe we need to look at the curriculum a bit as well. Because, you know, why don't we have philosophy much in our curriculum, for example, which is something that the French do? You know, why don't we have civics, which we use to, anyway, that sort of thing.
It's very tempting to say, relax, Father John sent his apologies, but of course I'm responsible for to say that kind of thing.
No, Father John is a favourite person of mine. Despite that's because I moved away from Northern Ireland when I was 11.
Yes, I mean, we've got lots of suggestions. The temptation is to pull out the good from those suggestions. How would you respond, Jonathan, to what they say?
Well, I would agree, and as I said earlier, I don't think we should abandon the community schools and say they give them up on ethics. And maybe one of the failures of community schools, because we have to blame, put blame where it is that too often, I think in the past, because they were consciously not faith schools, they almost became anti-faith. And there was almost a feeling that if you were religious, you were strange or odd, and there was a sort of a secularism too far. And we need to shift the pendulum back and say, no, you don't have to promote faith, but you can talk about it as a valid subject. You can respect it. You know, we teach our children about Napoleon and Bismarck. You don't have to believe in them, but you ought to know about them. Similarly, you ought to know about, you know, the difference between Catholic and Protestant, or why, you know, Hindus and Jews share certain values, but also differ in certain values, you know, so that we ought to have general knowledge. Yeah. But that will also have a knock-on effect to citizenship. So, yes, we need, the community schools need to do better.
I was going to draw from your interesting contribution there, and I'm fascinated by that, because it's this spiritual grounding that seems to pull people back from these terrible problems that they can line up in. So if we can give people that, our children, that as part of their education, I mean, obviously yours is a very intensive program, in quite extreme circumstances, but can we do that? My question is, can we do that without the driver of a faith school to do it? And that's, you know, where I come from, where I am sitting at the moment, I mean, I could be proved wrong, but I feel that you need that underlying commitment of those people who are going to deliver that, even if they do it in a non-faith way. I know that sounds a bit of a contradiction.
What I had to do when I went...
Sorry. I've got lost people here. Yes, sorry.
I wonder if I can introduce the topic of when should RE or religion be brought into schools at all, at what age stage. Now, I've recently been studying very carefully the preparations for the revised agreed syllabus for the 6 local authorities, and I am once again appalled at what it is proposed should be taught at the foundation stage is the worst, before they're 5, and then in key stage 1 between 5 and 7. It's already been remarked, I think, by you, John, that we live in a predominantly secular society, which means that most of the children entering school, whether they're in so-called faith schools or in community schools, do not come from religious backgrounds, faith backgrounds. They come from backgrounds which have various standards of behaviour, which is civic citizenship and all the rest of it. But they're not religious. They don't come from a religious background. And yet, from the word go, the schooling system in this country, let's keep it to England, leave Wales and Scotland out of Ireland out of it, from the word go at the foundation stage, and then in the first 5 to 7 and so on, and then I think onwards until secondary stage, they're thrown all sorts of religious terminology, and effectively they're being nurtured in a faith background or faith tradition. Now I ask both of our excellent speakers, is it appropriate for children at such an age to have religion thrust at them? Apart from expecting the teachers to teach it when most of them don't believe it either.
Yes. That's a really good question. I just think about the number of infant children who are taught about Noah's Ark for no reason. And the story of Noah's Ark. It's in every school. They've got no idea.
Because right from square one,
yes, I'm sorry, I invited you to speak by talking. Yes.
Well, let me say, I go back to going to primary school in the second year of the education system as it was brought in by the 1944 Butler Education Act. I go back that far. And under that Butler Education Act, there were laid down curriculum for all primary schools. And fundamental to that curriculum at the time was that there should be a school assembly which was based on readings from the Bible, singing hymns, and so on. There was a responsibility of teaching RE. The religious education under that act was religious education in the Anglican tradition. And that is still there. It's persisted and persisted and persisted, and without getting too political about it, it has been persisted universally by the Conservative Party.
Okay, I think we're getting off track.
Yeah, no, but we're still in the same situation with Michael Gove, who is encouraging more and more faith schools.
Yeah, I think we all understand the political context, but it's a little bit like buying meat from the butcher, from the baker shop.
No, we're discussing what faith schools should do in an environment where what religious education and whether or not there should be faith schools is actually being driven by our government.
Yes.
And the real point about that is that the damage is being done in that way. So if we want to look about improving the nature of faith school or improving the nature of teaching or what have you, unless you are in the independent sector, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I take your point, John. I think what I'm thinking is I'm not in a particular time frame, and I can appreciate the problem we're looking at the issue. I'm going to go right back because I was a bit self-indulgent by raising the point, and I apologise to meeting here. Is it irresponsible, do you think? You have young susceptible children in a school. What age should you do this to them?
Well, I think that there is a message that can be given at any age. I mean, it's about the teaching. It's about how it's introduced, as always. There is a right way to present for a certain age. I mean, whether it's right to tell the stories of some of the stories from the New and Old Testaments in the form in which they're written, probably not, if you wanted my view. But there can still be an interpretation that it could be appropriate to give. And you know, the experience with children is that they are very receptive, and if taught in a sensitive way, I think they will benefit.
Yeah, the question I think was, should you teach religion to young children? I think yes, if it's religious knowledge. No, if it's religious beliefs. Because wherever we're talking about state-funded schools, it's not the job of schools to be a backup or a safety net for the churches, synagogues and mosques that fail. So in other words, they've got to do their own job of indoctrinating, you know, confessional beliefs or the home. But I see nothing wrong in them learning about religious knowledge, you know, because particularly in England, which, you know, it was a Christian country, it still is in many respects, and religion permeates art or literature or architecture, and it's just important the children know the background. Whether they believe it today is another matter, but they need to have those tools. And also, perhaps the better schools will teach values independently, and they may illustrate those values with a story about, I don't know, Cain and Abel, or something from the Hindu tradition, or a story from the Quran, but it's the values and the knowledge that they should say yes to, but not to the confessional indoctrinational side.
Okay. I'm only going to take one more question because we could actually be here all night. This is a really interesting. Yes. Do speak. I have noticed, but there's 4 hands going up. It's a forest every time. Off you go.
My question is, do you not think that religious belief comes from the home? And that if you have firm religious belief at home, the child can withstand anything that they encounter in the outside world. And by having a faith school, you're actually trying to take the place of parents.
Oh, that's a nice
Can I just make one comment, which I think has been missing, that in fact, is it not the case that schools are in loco parentis? In other words, in many respects, they are acting in the place of parents, and parents entrust their children to the school. But what Rabbi Jonathan is talking about is like a kind of post-16 arrangement where you've got young adults who've decided they don't want to take any interest in certain things, and that's fair enough. But when you're talking about children, you are in fact talking about in loco parentis. And I accept it's quite complicated, but it's unfortunately not as clean and as straightforward as Rabbi Jonathan is saying, in my opinion.
So that's a lovely big field of forgiveness. Great. Yeah, that balance. On the home, perhaps.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
Okay, well, there were two questions, weren't there? I'm not sure if the school is really in loco parentis, because we don't say to parents, well, do you think your child should study geography or not, or history or not? And a lot of parents would or wouldn't be, would make a lot of choices about that. The state actually says, we think that children should know about history and French and geography and so forth. So I'm not sure if I accept your premise, to be honest, and that's why I don't think the state has a right to decide what confessional beliefs this child should have. And particularly bearing in mind that the reality is that actually most parents don't go to church or any religious institution. It's what, 3 or 4%. So why should 3 or 4% of parents in the country dictate what all the other parents do or don't do with their children's education? So I don't think that applies, to be honest. And secondly, for Rosamond's point, well, I think you're probably right, actually, that my experience is that actually what determines a child's outlook is its home, which is why, for instance, as it happened, for various reasons, I went to a CLE school, and I know I sang songs of praise every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday from the book. I can recite All Things Bright and Beautiful, or Christian Soldiers, off by heart. Right, 1-0. But I still became a rabbi because my compass, if you like, my religious compass, came from the home, and the ethics and the morals and the religious traditions and the food and the rituals and all the rest came from my home. So that's why I think schools are for education and the home is for religious direction.
Thank you. John?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, because and I mentioned in my initial presentation that, in today, with parents, both parents sometimes out working, there is a difficulty with home life. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think some parents recognise this. So I would say to you, why shouldn't they have the opportunity to send their children to a school where they might have, and let's talk about it as a spiritual grounding, but as I've said before, that religion schools or faith schools are the only places I think at the moment that can really come from. So that would be how I would respond.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Really do appreciate it. It's so interesting. I could keep you here all night, but I've just got to go trundling on, because what I would rather hope is that we'll have plenty of time for informal chat afterwards, and food biscuits, and exchange ideas and talk informally amongst each other. And hopefully nobody has fallen out over this interesting issue, or I will have words with them. Next item on the agenda is our next meeting. Faith in the Evidence, the answer to Dawkins. It's basically about God. And we've got Steve, who's Tom Woodman, who's coming from Reading University. I think he's a former lecturer there. He's written a book in response to Dawkins. The question I was going to ask this meeting is, it's been so lovely having two different perspectives. Would everybody here be happy if we asked someone if they would like to come along and present another point of view at the next meeting, so that we can have a slightly more balanced format? Is that in agreement with everybody here? Okay, that's great, because I don't really like to go inviting people on my own cuff without talking to all of you lot. In terms of any other business, we have feedback. Now, is that possible that I could say, could I trust you to read this, to look at it, to talk about it, to give David feedback? Because otherwise, you're going to give David too much power, because he's going to determine the future of this group, and we really can't let this happen. Right? And for those
I have no more power than anybody else.
for those of a particular faith group, can I just warn you
Video
to
camera
keep
there.
list, okay? So, you know, you've really got to
No.
very important.
Video cameras.
You're in
Why
charge.
not?
Standing behind us.
I'd appreciate that. I noticed traditionally, I've just started adding a multi-faith calendar, not rocket science, straight from the BBC website. And it's an opportunity for anybody who wants to tell us about a festival that they've got coming up in the next month. Educate us a little bit. If there's something that you think that the rest of us would like to know about, or that we haven't heard about. That would be really interesting. So at that point of this meeting, I'm turning it over to anybody who would like to say if there's anything special coming up. Yes.
Can I just mention, if anyone's interested in the cause, there are leaflets which you are welcome to take away. And also, because it's an interfaith group, I bought some copies of a book I was editing called Really Useful Prayers, which isn't to imply that other prayers are not useful. It's just that these deal with the situations that the prayer book, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever, tends not to, like what happens if you witness a car accident, or what happens if you have a miscarriage, or if you develop cancer or know someone else who's got cancer. What do you say when you don't know what to say? And because it's a religious group, the publisher said that the normal price, which is £10, is reduced to £5. So if anyone wants to have a look at it, it's only £5 for you. So do have a look afterwards.
And I'm sure you can sign copies for everybody.
At no extra cost.
And no extra cost.
Sign copies for £4.50.
Thank you. I mean, what we've got this evening is an example of how the interfaith process works. And it's not perfect. And as pointed out, there are issues that you leave undiscussed, unresolved, that you go over and mull over. And inevitably you come away and you do not agree with everything that is said at the meeting, otherwise there would be no point. But I think what we do all come away from is respect for good people. How incomplete truth is anyway, all we ever have is a matter of opinion, and as a reflection of our background. And, you know, I'm a Reading Football Club supporter, but I am aware that it isn't the only football club in the league at the moment. Okay, this is I can actually bore the socks off people when I talk about football sometimes. Thank you very, very much for coming this evening. I would very much appreciate it if you ate before you left as well, because otherwise it's very embarrassing for David and I to be left with food, and we'll put on weight if that happens too much. Can I conclude, first of all, by thanking our speakers?
Yeah.
Absolutely stonking great evening. What an excellent idea. You can stamp your feet as well if you'd like, but let's give them a round. Thank you. And may we finish with a few moments silence to bring us all together.